There are many theories as to how religious thought originated. But two of the most widely cited ideas have to do with how early humans interacted with their natural environment. Picture this: you're a human being living many thousands of years ago. You're out on the plains of the Serengeti, sitting around, waiting for an antelope to walk by so you can kill it for dinner. All of a sudden, you see the grasses in front of you rustling. What do? Do you stop and think about what might be causing the rustling, the wind or a lion, for example, or do you immediately take some kind of action? On the plains of the Serengeti, it would be better to not sit around and reflect. People who took their time got selected out. Humans who survived to procreate were those who had developed what evolutionary scientists call a hypersensitive agency detecting device, or HADD. In short, HADD is the mechanism that lets humans perceive that many things have agency, or the ability to act of their own accord. This understanding of how the world worked facilitated the rapid decision-making process that humans had to go through when they heard a rustling in the grass. But in addition to helping humans make rational decisions, HADD may have planted the seeds for religious thought. In addition to attributing agency to lions, for example, humans started attributing agency to things that really didn't have agency at all. You might think that raindrops aren't agents, they can't act of their own accord. They just fall. And clouds just form, they're not things that can act. But what human beings have done is to think that clouds are agents. They think clouds can act. And then humans took things to a whole new level. They started attributing meaning to the actions of things that weren't really acting of their own accord. For example, they thought raindrops were acting for a purpose. Acting for a purpose is the basis for what evolutionary scientists call the theory of mind, another idea that's often cited in discussions about the origins of religion. By attributing intention or purpose to the actions of beings that did have agency, like other people, humans stopped simply reacting as quickly as possible to the world around them. They started anticipating what other beings' actions might be and planning their own actions accordingly. Being able to sort of get into the mind of another purposeful being is what theory of mind is all about. Theory of mind was very helpful to early humans. It enabled them to discern other people's positive and negative intentions, thereby increasing their own chances of survival. But when people started attributing purpose to the actions of non-actors, like raindrops, theory of mind took a turn toward the supernatural. The roaring threat of a thunderstorm or the devastation of a flood is widely seen across cultures as the product of a dangerous personal agent in the sky or river. The movements of the sun, moon, and stars are widely explained as the movements of personal agents with extraordinary powers. This tendency to explain the natural world through the existence of beings with supernatural powers, things like gods, ancestral spirits, goblins, and fairies, formed the basis for religious beliefs, according to many cognitive scientists. Collectively, some scientists refer to hypersensitive agency detecting device and theory of mind as the God faculty. In fact, human beings haven't evolved past this way of thinking and making decisions. Now, we understand better that the things we thought were agents aren't agents. You can be educated out of some of these beliefs, but you can't be educated out of these cognitive faculties. We all have a hyperactive agency detecting device. We all have a theory of mind. But not everyone agrees that religious thinking is just a byproduct of evolution, in other words, something that came about as a result of non-religious, cognitive faculties. Some scientists see religion as more of an adaptation, a trait that stuck around because the people who possessed it were better able to survive and pass on their genes. Religion may have evolved as what he calls a group-level adaptation. Religion is a kind of glue that holds society together. Humans may have developed religion as a way to promote cooperation in social groups. Primates tend to live in groups because doing so benefits them in certain ways. For instance, hunting in groups is more effective than hunting alone. But living in groups also has drawbacks. Namely, some individuals take advantage of the system. We can call these people free riders. Free riding is disruptive because it loads the costs of the social contract onto some individuals, while others get away with paying significantly less. The origin of religion as a small-scale phenomenon. As a result, those who have been exploited become less willing to support the social contract. In the absence of sufficient benefit to outweigh these costs, individuals will leave in order to be in smaller groups that incur fewer costs. But if the group can figure out a way to get everyone to behave in an unselfish way, individual members of the group are less likely to storm off, and the group is more likely to remain cohesive. Religion may have naturally sprung up from this need to keep everybody on the same page. Humans' predisposition to attribute intention to just about everything, volcanic eruptions, lunar eclipses, thunderstorms, isn't necessarily the reason religion came about, but it helps to explain why religions typically involve supernatural elements that describe such phenomena. Scriptures of every religion contain some account of how the universe was created. Before the current advances in the field of cosmology, the origins of creation remained a matter of belief for people of different faiths, who relied on their respective religious scriptures for unraveling the mysteries surrounding how the universe came into being. Even before the advent of the modern scientific era, some scriptures declared their inability to comment suitably upon these intriguing questions, such as how the universe was created. The most pressing questions among these have captured the human imagination for thousands of years. Did anything exist beside the Creator before the creation of the universe began? And does anything share eternity with God? We will undertake an analysis into whether the scriptures of different religions address these questions or not, how these scriptures have dealt with this particular aspect of creation, and whether these scriptures maintain that God created this universe out of nothing, or they declare that when God commenced the process of creation, at least some entities were present and they were not created by God. These questions are inextricably linked to how the concept of God is presented by these scriptures, compelling questions in the nature of, is God powerful enough to start creation from nothing? Or have matter, time, space, or souls always existed, and when God created this universe he merely used these constituents as building blocks? If the latter theory were to be accepted, then we would be forced to conclude that one or more of these entities are eternal like God. Theoretical physicists have led scientific inquiries into these confounding questions by using various self-devised methods as the understanding of science and cosmology have advanced. For scientists who deny the existence of God altogether or who are atheists, the challenge of rendering a plausible explanation for the creation of the universe is increasingly complex. If we were to assume that the universe has no creator and initially the energy content of the universe was zero, then we are left with the unanswered and equally puzzling question of how the present energy content of the universe may be explained by the laws of physics. Intriguing as these scientific debates are, we now turn to the focus of the theoretical inquiry into how did the ancient scriptures address the question of the creation of the universe? Hinduism. Who verily knows and who can declare it, whence it was born and whence comes this creation? The gods are latter than this world's production. Who knows thence first it came into being? He, the first origin of this creation, whether he formed it all or did not form it. Whose eye control this world in highest heaven, he verily knows it, or perhaps he knows not. This reference makes it clear that, according to the Rigveda, it is unclear whether creation occurred on God's command or whether creation occurred as a consequence of a spontaneous phenomenon, leaving unanswered the question of whether God, or gods, themselves had any definite knowledge about creation. We will now explore how the Rigveda's narration evolved through in subsequent Hindu scriptures. A topic of repeated discussion in the Hindu literature is whether everything was non-existent in the beginning except for the Creator and was subsequently created, or whether some other entities of the universe share eternity with the Creator. This question has been stirring the minds of Hindu theologians since ancient times. The Upanishads are philosophical texts considered to be early sources of the tenets of Hinduism. There are approximately 200 Upanishads, almost 12 of which are relatively older than the others. The Khandogya Upanishad narrates that Uddalaka, the son of Aruna, taught his son, "In the beginning, my dear, there was that only which is one only, without a second." Others say, "In the beginning there was only which is not, one only, without a second, and from that which is not, that which is was born." The father continued, "But how could it be thus, my dear? How could that which is, be born of that which is not?" "No, my dear, only that which is, was in the beginning, one only without a second." Like the creation hymn of Rigveda, this ancient sage leaves the reader in confusion about the question under discussion. However, it is interesting to note that despite Hinduism being practiced today as a polytheistic religion, the ancient sages of the religion allude to a single entity as creator in the beginning of our universe. Among the trinity of the most prominent Hindu gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma is the cosmic creator. Vishnu preserves every cycle of creation, and at the end of each cycle Shiva destroys it all. Thus, this begs the question whether, according to Hindu scriptures, Brahma created everything at the dawn of creation, or whether there was some raw material available before this process began. While a variety of Hindu scriptures address this question, the viewpoints expressed therein are seldom aligned with each other. Among Hindu literature, Manusmriti, or the Laws of Manu, is the discourse given by the sage Manu to the congregation of rishis after the Great Deluge. The Laws of Manu were compiled in response to the flood and aimed at educating all strata of society on how to lead an organized life and be well equipped to face such calamities in the future. Manu also endeavored to describe the origins of the universe, although his laws do not state that the universe was ever non-existent. Instead, it narrates that in the beginning the universe was in a state of sleep and engulfed in total darkness. The Manusmriti propounds, "This universe existed in the shape of darkness, unperceived, destitute of distinctive marks, unattainable by reasoning, unknowable, wholly immersed as it were in deep sleep." The Shatapatha Brahmana, one of the important Hindu texts describing the Vedic rituals, also contains myths about creation and the deluge of Manu. It declares that before the Creator began the process of creation, there was absolutely nothing present. Furthermore, the Sathapatha Brahmana expounds that even the Creator himself in the beginning initially did not possess a mind, which needed to be created first. As this passage of Sathapatha Brahmana tells us, "Verily there was nothing here in the beginning, by death this universe was covered, by hunger, for death is hunger. He created for himself this mind, thinking, may I have a soul." Strangely, according to this aforementioned passage from the Sathapatha Brahmana, initially the Creator did not possess any soul or mind, but still had the capability to create a mind and soul. The Vedanta Sutras form a part of Vedic literature that was created to systemize and to remove contradictions within Vedic literature. The Vedanta Sutras present a different idea altogether, which is contradictory to the idea presented in the above-mentioned passage of Sathapatha Brahmana. It states that ether does not originate, on account of the absence of scriptural statement. Here the word akasa has been translated as ether. In other places, it has been translated as space. To summarize, according to Taittiriya Upanishad and the Sathapatha Brahmana, nothing was present before the creation of the universe. But according to the laws of Manu, in the beginning this universe was in a state of sleep, and according to the Vedanta Sutras, ether is eternal and it was present even before the beginning of creation. The diversity of these viewpoints leaves the question of the creation of the universe in a more intriguing yet vexed place than before. An examination of the scriptures of other religions is thereby imperative in order to assess how these have addressed this puzzling question of how the universe came into being. Taoism. Tao Te King, the teachings of Lao Tzu, describes Tao in these words. The Tao that can be trodden is not the enduring end. Unchanging Tao. The name that can be named is not the enduring end. Unchanging name. Conceived of as, having no name, it is the originator of heaven and earth. Conceived of as, having a name, it is the mother of all things. In the above-mentioned reference, Tao is presented as the mother of all things. Leaving aside the debate about the nature of Tao, later scriptures of Taoism prescribe that space already existed at the time of the creation of the universe. As this passage from the writings of Kuang-zi, or Zhuangzi, a Chinese sage who lived 4 centuries before Christ, tells us. In the grand beginning of all things, there was nothing in all the vacancy of space, there was nothing that could be named. It was in this state that there arose the first existence, but still without bodily shape. Space may have meant nothing when Kuang-zi uttered these words, but today, in light of advances in the physical sciences, we know that even space is a complex entity. Christianity. The first 2 chapters of the Bible narrate the creation story. They begin with the words, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." It is clear that according to the Bible that the heavens and the earth are the creation of God. However, the book of Genesis has not addressed the question with respect to whether any matter or space existed at the time this process commenced. Islam. The Holy Quran is explicitly clear about how creation began. Now we come to the Islamic concept on this topic. The Quran offers insights into the phenomenon of the creation of the universe and prescribes with great clarity that God created everything. As the following verse of the Quran states, "Such is Allah, your Lord. There is no God but He, the Creator of all things, so worship Him. And He is guardian over everything." According to the foregoing Quranic verse, everything is the creation of God. The following 2 verses of the Quran and the Arabic word used in them sheds further light on this topic. The originator of heavens and the earth. How can He have a son when He has no consort, and when He has created everything and has knowledge of all things? He is the originator of the heavens and the earth. When He decrees a thing, He only says to it be and it is. Therefore, as the aforementioned verses of the Quran clearly reveal, the creation of the universe was not a spontaneous phenomenon. Allah created everything. According to the Quran, His decree can create anything out of nothing. And since God created everything, it follows that no entity shares eternity with the Creator. To examine the true meaning of these verses, we shall render an etymological account of the Arabic word badi, used therein. The word badi is often translated as the originator, which is one of the names and attributes of God used in the Quran. The Dictionary of Lane translates badi as, He originator of creation, according to His own will, not after the similitude of anything pre-existing. However, Historically, Badi has been used in a more wide-ranging fashion, and its use is not restricted to connoting originator. Old dictionaries such as the Al-Mufradat fi Gharib al-Quran by Al-Muragib Isfahani, compiled almost 900 years ago, explains that Badi, when used in connection with God, signifies originating the creation of a thing without any tool, matter, time, or place. Keeping these meanings ascribed to the word Badi in mind, we can submit conclusively that the Quran credits the entire process of the creation of the universe to God, and provides that at the time of creation, matter and space did not exist, even time was the creation of Allah. The Promised Messiah versus the Arya Samaj. During the 19th century, Pandit Dayanand founded a Hindu reformist movement by the name of Arya Samaj. The cornerstone of the movement's philosophy was the belief in the infallibility of Veda. They believed that Prakriti, or fundamental matter, and souls were never created, and instead were eternal like the Creator. Rejecting the Pandit's beliefs, the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement in Islam, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmadis, wrote that the Arya concept of God represented a weak God who was not all-powerful as presented by the Quran. He contended that if matter and its properties and the souls of living beings together with their attributes were not God's creation, then there was hardly any room in this universe for God. While undertaking an analysis of the beliefs of the Arya Samaj, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmadis wrote, "Their brothers, the Arya Samajists, who claim that they follow the Vedas strictly, deprive God Almighty of the power of creation. They hold that souls are uncreated and self-existing like God Himself, whereas reason would consider it a defect in God Almighty that He should be the master of the world and yet should not be the Lord and creator of something, and that the life of the world should not depend on His support but should be self-existing. Of the two positions, one that He has brought into existence the whole universe out of His own perfect power and is its Lord and Creator, and that the whole of the universe is dependent upon His providence, and that the attribute of creation and its power is inherent in His being, and that He is not subject to birth or death, and secondly, that the whole of creation, which is under His control, is not created by Him, and is not dependent upon Him for its existence, and that He is not its Creator and Lord, and does not possess the attribute of creation, and is not free from the defects of birth and death. Reason would surely support the first. Scientific positions and the Big Bang Theory. As has been explored, this question has been discussed in scriptures of different religions for thousands of years. And theologians, while discussing this question, have been arriving at different conclusions. The mysteries surrounding the beginning of the universe have confounded theologians and scientists alike. Before the acceptance of the Big Bang Theory, scientists believed in a stationary universe, which had existed forever. When evidence of an expanding universe led to the conclusion that this universe had a beginning in the form of a Big Bang, even Einstein found this idea to be perplexing. He wrote to another scientist stating that, "To admit such possibilities seems senseless to me." However, such apprehensions had to be shelved in the face of mounting scientific evidence in support of the Big Bang Theory. Today, we know that in the beginning, almost 15 billion years ago, this universe existed in a state of singularity, as Bill Bryson, author of A Short History of Nearly Everything, illuminatingly writes. It is natural but wrong to visualize the singularity as a kind of pregnant dot hanging in a dark, boundless void. But there is no space, no darkness. The singularity has no around it. There is no space for it to occupy, no place for it to be. We can't even ask how long it has been there, whether it has just lately popped into being, like a good idea, or whether it has been there forever, quietly awaiting the right moment. Time doesn't exist. There is no past for it to emerge from. And so, from nothing, our universe begins. Scientists, continuing, cautions against perceiving the Big Bang as a massive explosion out of which the universe emerged. Instead, they states that it was a vast, sudden expansion on a whopping scale. In this state everything was in a singularity, and in this state laws of physics break down. Then space-time began at Big Bang singularity and the universe passed through a phase of inflationary expansion. Physicists today continue to rattle their brains with the question of how the universe began and whether the laws of physics alone are enough to explain its creation from nothing. They have been compelled to ask whether the principle of quantum fluctuation can render an explanation for how the universe was created without the assistance of a divine hand. Despite some leading biologists such as Richard Dawkins in his recent publication, The God Delusion, arguing that science has rendered God unnecessary, others have plainly acknowledged the inextricable link between these questions and God, as Dr. Andre Linde, a cosmologist at Stanford, told the New York Times in 2001, these are very close to religious questions. Some scriptures, such as the Bible, do not address this question clearly. In Vedas it is concluded that the human mind cannot know the reality of this topic. The Rigveda declares that perhaps even God is unaware of the reality of the beginning of the universe. According to Manu, in the beginning, the constituents of the universe were present but were in a dormant state. According to Vedanta sutras and Tao scriptures, Kuang-zi, space is eternal and was present when the Creator initiated the creation of the universe. Among the philosophical discourses of Hindu religion, Kandogya Upanishad and Sathapatha Brahmana conclude that nothing was present in the beginning, beside the Creator. The Quran declares that every entity, including matter, space, souls, and time, were created by Allah alone. Nothing is eternal except for God. Scriptures of different religions provide varying answers into the question of the creation of the universe, with different degrees of clarity. Consequently, their respective concepts about the power of God to create a universe out of nothing are also different from one another. After thousands of years, this question still irritates the minds of ordinary people, theologians, and scientists. A religion is not simply a way of life, each of the major ones is an economical organization as well. Religion is big business. There are whole huge religious economies, and some of them are kept shrouded. They say that there are only two certainties in life, paying taxes, and death. And religion is exempt from both. Whether they are promising the perfect afterlife in exchange for your tithes, or dodging the taxman, it's a circular business plan that works. And so far no one's come back from the promised afterlife to ask for a refund. Countdown list and begin with the 10th richest religious organization. 10. Church of Scientology. If we told you to pay thousands of dollars to have your human flaws absolved by a religion formed by a science fiction writer, we doubt you'd bring out your checkbook without asking a few questions first. But somehow L. Ron Hubbard managed to get it right. What is even more surprising is that he seemed to have it all figured out as a retirement plan from the start. He was famously quoted saying, "You don't get rich writing science fiction. If you want to get rich, you start a religion." And he was right. When he was done writing about aliens in his science fiction books, he started the Church of Scientology in 1952. It was a spin-off from his self-help program called Dianetics. He captured the imagination of the Hollywood elite, and this helped give his religion credibility and amass him a fortune. The church has a book value of $1.7 billion, and a property portfolio of $1.5 billion, all funded by an annual income of $200 million. The sign-up fees are ludicrous, but they offer you pureness of body and soul if you stick with it. As you pay up, you can move up the ranks of the church, earning your more respect and purity. To reach the highest rank of operating Thetan level 8, will set you back $256,000. This is the level that actor, Tom Cruise, has reached. The church spends their money on items like gold bullion costing $3 million. They made a purchase of a cruise ship at $14.1 million. But it is not all smooth sailing. They have been involved in many scandals and rights violations, including missing wives, child abuse, and alien lizards. It's a really interesting one if you want some bedtime reading. 9. Non-denominational Christianity. If you mistake one of these churches for a big budget concert, you won't be alone. The lights, pyrotechnics, staging, stadium seating, and tattooed and bearded rock bands look right out of a rock show. You can even get a dairy-free flat white and fresh bagel at the on-site coffee shop at most of these mega churches. Non-denominational Christian churches enjoy all the tax breaks of traditional religions with none of the established rules. While they still rely on regular tithing, a religious obligation, to fund their cash flow, they can use it as they see fit, which often includes upgrades to pastors' mega mansions, sports cars, private jets, and yachts. The sky is the limit when it comes to spending God's money. Their members are completely devout, and spend most of their spare time occupied with church life and fundraising events. Perhaps keeping their flock too busy to ask questions is part of the business model that works. 8. The Church of England. When the religion of the time didn't suit him, King Henry VIII founded his own church. The Church of England allowed divorce, and Henry wanted out of his marriage with Catherine of Aragon. Newly single, he realized there is more benefit to owning a church, and the Anglican Church began to grow in size and wealth. Today the Anglican Church is estimated to own $6.7 billion worth of property, and is the largest landowner in England. They rake in hundreds of millions in income each year through tithe baskets. Now that's what we call a good divorce settlement. If you want to know more about one of the most secretive groups on the planet, stick around till the end when we unpack it. 7. Hinduism. Hinduism is firmly rooted in the belief that abundance and wealth come as gifts from the gods. In fact, the Hindu gods live in wealth and opulence, and devout Hindus heap gifts of adoration and appreciation of effigies for them. In the US alone, Hindus are the second richest religious body. The Hindu ethos is to be in a constant pursuit of self-realization and self-knowledge, so it is not a system that you ever summit. The aim is to find mental and physical wealth through the Hindu religious practices, and with such a large brief, it is a lifelong pursuit. 6. Episcopalian. When the Church of England members reached North America, they split into several new churches. One being the Episcopal Church, who split from the Anglicans when they didn't want to swear allegiance to the British monarch any longer. Today it is the 14th largest denomination in the US, nearly 2 million members strong. It is spread throughout Europe, Taiwan, and Latin America. It is the members of the church itself that make it part of this list. The members of the Episcopal Church in the US are the wealthiest group of religious believers in the country. So you can imagine how large the amounts are going into the tithe basket of the church. 5. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Mormons are everywhere. From Finland to Japan you will find communities from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Sure, there are plenty of gags about Mormons ringing your doorbell trying to recruit you. But clearly this strategy works because Mormons are the fastest growing and one of the wealthiest religions on the planet. Hell, they even have a musical about them. Their balance sheet reflects assets of over $30 billion. With an annual income of $6 billion, of which 90% is from members' tithes. Members are obliged to give 10% of their entire income, that's the before-tax amount, Aluxers. With a growing membership sitting at over 14 million members, the Mormons have a pretty secure future income. 4. Televangelism. Just when televangelism seemed to be cooling down, COVID-19 breathed new life into the age-old art of scamming old people out of money in hopes of eternal life. Social distancing meant that in-person churches were closed, and many Christians turned to their TVs for their religious fix. Here somewhere between Teva and Tony Robbins are the murky waters of televangelism, where Christian preachers offer self-help advice loosely based on the Bible. Income is in the form of donations from viewers, advertising sales, and then merchandise. Like a good dealer, the first hit is free. After that, viewers have to cough up more for the DVD set, the books, or part 2 of the talk series. Televangelists are well known for splashy lifestyles of luxury yachts, mansions, stretch Hummers and private jets. All accumulated tax-free under the protection of religious freedom. Televangelism is reported to be a $2.3 billion industry, but that is only what is declared. The real figures are probably much more. 3. Judaism. Jewish people are often thought to be wealthy. Thanks to their great education and generational business knowledge, Jewish people make up a quarter of the 400 wealthiest people in America. The knock-on effect is that given the religion's obligatory 10% tithes on a household's income, the Jewish religion is wealthy too. But we won't spill all the Jewish secrets to wealth. 2. Islam. The Middle East is abundant in oil, and is also the heart of the Islam faith. Because Islam has no laws that condemn the accumulation of wealth, it is a perfect environment to create the second wealthiest religion in the world. Many of the Middle Eastern country leaders are kings and also Islamic, putting the type of wealth the relatively young faith has accumulated in a different league from those that came before. Islam is also one of the fastest growing religions in the world, with huge growth in Indonesia, South Asian, and Sub-Saharan Africa. 22% of the global population are Muslim. Zakat is the Muslim version of mandatory giving, which is 2.5% of the members' accumulated wealth. This must be used solely for the benefit of the poor, destitute, and others. The Islamic faith has accumulated assets of $3 trillion as of a 2020 estimate. This is one of the largest forms of wealth transfer to the poor in existence. 1. Roman Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is considered the wealthiest organization in the world. You might say that it is the biggest financial power on the planet. So, whatever your thoughts on the religious aspect, you have to admire the balance sheet. Their operating budget is in the hundreds of billions of dollars, which is far higher than companies like Apple. The Catholic Church's wealth lies in its history. From priceless art pieces to prime tourism real estate, the religion was able to carve out a consistent income that attracts its billion-strong membership. On the converse, they have a low staff cost, as upon entering the calling, Catholic priests and nuns take a vow of poverty and don't own anything themselves. Tithing is encouraged by the Church's teachings, and if you do the math on 1 billion members, that's plenty of income to work with. The Church's asset figures are hard to come by, but the Vatican itself is flush with assets and security investments deep in the billions of dollars. The figures are shrouded in secrecy, but the sheer size of the Church's membership ensures it is always in the green. Some churches have been conserved since time immemorial, but there are quite a few that underwent a fancy renovation. Have a look inside 10 stylish churches converted into luxury homes. Both religion and politics have one common goal, that is to acquire political power and use it to fulfill their aims. However, to achieve this object, their methods are different. Religion mobilizes religious sensibilities of people in order to get their support to capture power, while politics uses intrigue, diplomacy, and makes attempt to win public opinion either democratically, if the system allows it, or usurps power with the help of army, if the society is underdeveloped and backward. Therefore, in power struggle, both politics and religion make attempts to undermine each other. If religion holds political authority, its ambition is to exploit it to fulfill a divine mission. It claims that it derives authority from divinity and therefore its mission is holy, motivated to reform society under the spiritual guidance. Politics, on the contrary, bereft of any value, directs its policy on the needs and requirements of society, whereupon it obliges to change laws and system of government accordingly. This is a basic difference between two approaches of religion and politics. Religion determines its authority on divine laws which could not be changed with human intervention. While in pragmatic political approach society should move ahead, change and adjust itself with the new arising challenges of time. In its secular approach man is responsible to determine his destiny. He is not under the control of divinity to remain submissive and inactive. On the contrary, he is supposed to initiate and plan to build a society according to his vision. There are three models in history related to religion and politics. In one, when religion and politics both unite with each other in an attempt to monopolize political power, we call it integration and sharing model. In the second model, politic, after subduing and overpowering religion, uses it for its interests. In this model religion plays subservient role to politics. In the third model both come into conflict with each other that subsequently lead their separation. In this model they appear as rivals and compete to struggle for domination. The study of beginning and spread of any religion shows that every religion is started in particular space and time, therefore, main focus of its teachings is the solution of existing problems. However, with the change of time there are new challenges and a religion has to respond them for its survival. In this process, it has to adjust its teachings according to changes. With the passage of time, a stage comes when a religion fails to respond challenges of its time and finds hardly any space to adjust according to new environments. For example, in case of Islam, it took nearly 2.5 centuries to complete its orthodoxy. Once the process was complete, it became impossible for orthodoxy to give any place to new ideas and new thinking. It was believed that any change in the structure would weaken its base. On this plea it persists to retain its old structure without any addition. At this stage there remain three options for any religion. 1. Avoid and disapprove any change in its structure. If any attempt is made to reinterpret its teachings, such attempts either is crushed politically or with the help of religious injunctions, fatwa in case of Islam. Those who claim to reconstruct religious thoughts, they should be condemned as enemies of religion and believers should be warned to boycott them and not listen to their views. 2. In the second option, religion has a choice to adapt itself according to the needs of time and accept new interpretation relating to its teachings and accommodating modernity. 3. In the third option, if religion fails to respond to the challenges and feels insecure, it withdraws from the active life and decides not to entangle in worldly affairs. It confines its activities to spirituality. The helplessness of religion is obvious in the present circumstances in which scientific and technological inventions are rapidly changing the society and its character, making it more complex and mechanical. Especially, with the extension of knowledge, politics, economics, sciences, technology, and other branches of knowledge assume a separate entity that could be specialized and handled by professionals. Ulama or religious scholars are not in a position to understand intricacies of these professions and adjust them with religious teachings. This is the reason why in some societies religion is separated from politics and economics and it no more enjoys the domination over the society, which it did in the medieval period. The characteristic of three reactions may be defined as aggressive, compromising, and separatist respectively. There are groups of people in every society who want change in their practical life, but at the same time they desire not to abandon religion. These people become supporters of new interpretation of religion that suits their way of life. It causes emergence of new sects. Therefore, we find that in every religion, there are new sects, which fulfill the demands of a group of people within a span of time and then disappear in oblivion of history. However, some sects persist and survive. For example, in the Christianity, when bourgeoisie wanted religious sanction of interest, a religious reformer allowed it on the basis of religion. It removed business hurdles and the merchant and industrial classes flourished. Calvin did for the bourgeoisie of the 16th century what Marx did for the proletariat of the 19th century. In the Islamic history, conflict between religion and politics settled after the Abbasid Revolution, when the Iranians, who made the revolution a success and subsequently assumed position of power and authority in the government administration, formulated the state policy of their liking. They wanted to make the Abbasid Caliph just like the Persian monarch, having absolute political power with religious authority, a combination of temporal and spiritual powers. The Iranian bureaucracy was opposed by ulama who strove to curtail the power of the caliph in view of the Shariat, religious laws. As the Iranians had political and military support, they cornered ulama in their efforts and made the caliph a Persian king along with all royal symbols and rituals which once prevailed at the Sassanid court. However, it was settled that in practice the caliph would remain absolute in administrative and political matters, but he would not interfere in the affairs of the Shariat nor would make any effort to change it. It would remain the domain of ulama. It is how religion and politics separated with each other in the early stage of Islamic history. As a result of this settlement, a system emerged in which the ruler had unlimited power. Professional bureaucracy to administer the state and its affairs supported him. Ulama joined the state as qazi, judge, mufti, interpreter of law, mutasab, ombudsman, and as imam, prayer leader. In these capacities they became servants of the state, and as such their responsibility was to obey ruler and state and interpret Shariat according to the interest of the caliph. Once the economic interest of the ulama were linked to the state, as they received either stipends or jagir, fief, from the state, their main concern was to please the ruler. On the other hand, rulers also adopted a policy of conciliation toward them. They showed outward respect to them, invited them to their court to deliver sermons and ask for their advice on important issues. However, whenever they wanted to use these ulama for their political interest, they asked them to issue fatwa in their favor, which they obliged with pleasure. We find that how these ulama religiously justified the Persian court ceremonies of prostration before the ruler, kissing his feet or hands and address him with high-sounding titles. They also helped rulers if they wanted to avoid religious duties such as obligatory daily prayers and fasting in the month of Ramazan. To get sexual pleasure, rulers got religious sanction by ulama to marry and divorce as they liked and to keep as many slave girls as they wished. During the Abbasid period, as the power of the caliph increased, influence of ulama decreased and they ultimately became subservient to the ruler and his whims. With the decline of the Abbasids, provincial ruling dynasties emerged and introduced the institution of the sultanate, kingship. Muslim jurists justified it on the plea that it would prevent chaos and keep law and order in the society. Secondly, they also legitimized the usurpation of power by powerful military man, arguing that to reject him meant to create political unrest and a situation of civil war. Al-Marwardi was the political thinker who in his book Al-Aim al-Sultaniya advises that a usurper should be recognized as legal ruler just to avoid bloodshed. After settling the issue of kingship and usurper, the question was whether a ruler should remain under religious authority or should he use religion for his political motives. To respond to this question and how kings should behave, a genre of literature was produced known as the Mirror of Princes. Some of the important books in this literature, kingship was recognized as a hereditary institution and the ruler was addressed as Zilai Ilahi, shadow of God. It was a Machiavellian step that freed king from all religious bindings and made him authoritative and powerful. Similarly, the adab or the literature of the mirror of princes made the Muslim king free from the Shariat and allowed him to rule absolutely. Their model was the Sassanid king who was all-powerful, in religion as well as worldly matters. However, attempt was made to control the authority of the ruler by asking him to follow a policy of justice like Anushirwan, the legendary king of Persia, who was famous for his benevolence and acts of justice. The method was to control absolute power by asking him to follow and adhere moral and ethical values in order to govern people. In the second model of the state, religion dominates politics and uses it for implementation of its practices. There were two types of religious dominations over politics. In one case, a ruler, in the interest of his rule and stability of his ruling dynasty, implement the Shariat and allow ulama to play leading role in the state affairs. In the second category, ulama, after capturing political power, establish a religious state and force people to follow their religious agenda. Such religious states, wherever they were founded in the West or in the East, basically believed that human being could be reformed only by coercion and control over his action. Therefore, to set up a purified society, strict and exemplary punishments were given on minor crimes. It was also believed that worldly rulers were corrupt and evil-minded, therefore, only religious scholars could rule with honesty and work for the welfare of people. In the 19th century, the Islamic world passed through a crisis of colonialism that engulfed it and gradually established political domination nearly in all Muslim countries. The colonial state introduced a new structure of legal system that was quite different than the Shariat. Colonial state separated religion from politics. Under these circumstances, two types of movements emerged in the Islamic countries: revivalist movements which resisted colonial state and its hegemony and wanted to implement the Shariat. Mahdi Sudanese movement in Sudan and Sanyasi movement in Libya worked in this direction. Then there were religious movements whose interest was to create a strong sense of religious identity among the Muslims without involving in politics. They were not in favor of cooperating with the colonial state. Deoband was its example. In its early period it remained aloof from politics and concentrated on religious teachings and spiritual training of the Muslim community. The Brahvis specially confined their activities to religious rituals. However, the colonial state and its institutions had great impact on the social, cultural, and economic life of colonized society. Introduction of technology changed the structure of society and behavior of the people. New ideas of nationalism, socialism, Marxism, and the concept of free market challenged the old customs, traditions and values. Religion was not in a position to respond to these new challenges, therefore, it adopted a defensive policy and failed to take part in creative process of modern civilization. When it became stagnant and lost energy and power to sustain opposition of modernity, it adopted an ideology of extremism and fundamentalism. After analyzing the impact of different models, we can reach to the conclusion that what comes out when religion and politics integrate with each other, and what happens when politics dominates religion or religion subordinates politics. In case of this integration, an absolutist and dictatorial system emerges which saps all creative energies of society and reduces it to passivity. In case of conflict, both religion and politics use people and their resources in acquiring power and deprive them of social and cultural activities. For example, in today's Saudi Arabia, there is wealth and vast material resources that provide all sorts of comfort and luxury, but there is no culture. Culturally, it is the most backward and barren society. It neither produced any musician, nor artist, writer, and filmmaker. It is a society of consumers and not of contributors. However, whenever, religion relegates under the political, social, or economic pressure. Society contributes in philosophy, art, and literature, and music. In history, such were the periods of the Abbasid rule, whose caliph patronized men of letters and scientists. Akbar's period in the Mughal rule is significant because during this period new ideas were allowed to flourish. Society becomes free when the hold of religion is weak. It becomes barren when religion dominates society and adopts hostility to all new changes. It reverts back society to old traditions and reduces the role of modernity. Separation of religion from politics does not make it weak or vulnerable. Real strength of religion lies in the belief in its truthfulness and not in patronization and protection of state. History is evident that whenever politics is called to help religion, it uses it for its interest and makes effort to subordinate it, which subsequently weakens religion and its beliefs. Moreover, whenever religion tries to interfere in economy or politics and cannot keep pace with changes, it becomes butt of criticism. It is evident that in the modern period there is rapid development in social and natural sciences, and religion is not in a position to accommodate all these changes or to interpret them in religious terms. Therefore, the best way is to separate it from politics, economy, and science and technology. Religions of India. Speculations regarding sacrifice and prescribed rituals seem to have been worked out more fully in the Vedic and later Hindu religion in India than anywhere else. These rites, laid down in a complicated system known mainly from the Brahmana texts, included obligatory sacrifices following the course of the year or the important moments in the life of an individual, and optional sacrifices occasioned by the special wishes of a sacrificer. Yet cultic sacrifice has not developed in Buddhism, another religion that arose in India. Ritual sacrifice was judged to be ineffective and in some of its forms to involve cruelty and to run counter to the law of ahimsa, or non-injury. There are, however, in the Jataka stories of the Buddha's previous births accounts of his self-sacrifices. Furthermore, Buddhism emphasizes the notion of ethical sacrifices, acts of self-discipline, and there are instances of devotional offerings, such as burnt incense, to the Buddha. Religions of China. In China, sacrifice, like other aspects of religion, has existed at a number of different levels. The essential feature of imperial worship in ancient China was the elaborate sacrifices offered by the emperor himself to heaven and earth. There are also records of sacrifice, including human sacrifice, associated with the death of a ruler because it was thought proper for him to be accompanied in death with those who served him during life. But, because the common people were excluded from participation in imperial sacrifices, they had lesser gods, some universal, some local, to whom sacrifices were made. Furthermore, ancestor worship has been the most universal form of religion throughout China's long history. It was the responsibility of the head of a household to see to it that sacrificial offerings to the dead were renewed constantly. The blending of these elements with such established religions as Buddhism and Daoism influenced the great diversification of sacrificial rites in China. Religions of Japan. In ancient Japan, offering occupied a particularly important place in religion because the relationship of the people to their gods seems frequently to have had the character of a bargain rather than of adoration. It is probable that the offerings were originally individual, but they gradually became collective, especially as all powers, including religious, were concentrated in the hands of the emperor, who officiated in the name of all his people. Human sacrifice to natural deities and at burials was once common but seems generally to have been abandoned in the early Middle Ages. Besides human sacrifices and their more modern substitutes, the Japanese offered to the gods all the things that man regards as necessary for life: food, clothing, shelter, or merely useful and pleasing, means of transportation, tools, weapons, objects of entertainment. These practices, which were found in the traditional religion known as Shinto, were modified when Confucianism and Buddhism were introduced into Japan during the 5th and 6th centuries CE. Ancient Greece. The Homeric poems contain the most complete descriptions of sacrificial rites in ancient Greece. These rites, which were maintained almost without change for more than 10 centuries, were of two types: rites, thisia, addressed to the Olympian deities, which included burning part of a victim and then participating in a joyful meal offered to the gods during the daytime primarily to serve and establish communion with the gods, and rites, sphagia, addressed to the infernal or chthonic deities, which involved the total burning or burying of a victim in a somber nocturnal ceremony to placate or avert the malevolent chthonic powers. Besides the official or quasi-official rites, the popular religion, already in Homer, comprised sacrifices of all kinds of animals and of vegetables, fruits, cheese, and honey offered as expiation, supplication, or thanksgiving by worshippers belonging to all classes of society. Furthermore, the secret worship of what are known as the mysteries cults, normally promising immortality or some form of personal relationship with a god, became widespread. This practice became especially prominent during the Hellenistic period. Judaism. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE marked a profound change in the worship of the Jewish people. Before that event, sacrifice was the central act of Israelite worship, and there were many categories of sacrificial rites that had evolved through the history of the Jews into a minutely detailed system found in that part of the Torah, Law, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, that is ascribed by biblical scholars to the priestly code, which became established following the Babylonian exile, 586–538 BCE. The sacrificial system ceased, however, with the destruction of the temple, and prayer took the place of sacrifices. In modern Judaism, the Orthodox prayer books still contain prayers for the reinstitution of the sacrificial cult in the rebuilt temple. Reform Judaism, however, has abolished or modified these prayers in keeping with the conception of sacrifice as a once adequate but now outmoded form of worship, and some conservative congregations have also rephrased references to sacrifices so that they indicate solely past events without implying any hope for the future restoration of the rite. Christianity. The notion of sacrifice emerged in the early Christian communities in several different contexts. The death of Christ upon the cross, preceded by the Last Supper, was narrated in the Gospels in sacrificial terms. The life of Christ, culminating in his passion and death, was seen as the perfect sacrifice, and his resurrection and glorification were seen as God the Father's seal of approval on that life. The notion that members of the Church are vitally linked to Christ and that their lives must be sacrificial was also elaborated, especially in the letters of St. Paul. Moreover, from the first decades of the Church's existence, the celebration of the Eucharistic meal was connected with the sacrifice of Jesus. It was a memorial, anamnesis, a term denoting some sort of identity between the things so described and that to which it referred of that sacrifice. The interpretation of sacrifice, and particularly of the Eucharist as sacrifice, has varied greatly within the different Christian traditions, partly because the sacrificial terminology in which the Eucharist was originally described became foreign to Christian thinkers. In short, during the Middle Ages, the Eastern Church viewed the Eucharist principally as a life-giving encounter with Christ the resurrected. The Roman Church, however, saw it primarily as a bloodless repetition of the bloody sacrifice of Christ on the cross. For the Protestant reformers in the 16th century, the sacrifice of Christ was unique and all-sufficing, so that the idea of repeating it in cult became unnecessary. Sacrifice was separated from liturgy and was associated, especially in Calvinist Protestantism, with the personal ethical acts that should be made by a Christian believer. The ecumenical movement of the 20th century, bolstered by modern biblical scholarship, led some of the Christian churches, the Roman Catholic and Lutheran churches, to realize that they are not so far apart in their understanding of the Eucharist as sacrifice as was formerly thought, and that they hold many elements of belief in common. Islam. Faint shadows of sacrifice as it was practiced by the pre-Islamic Arabs have influenced Muslims, so that they consider every slaughter of an animal an act of religion. They also celebrate feasts in fulfillment of a vow or in thanksgiving for good fortune, but there is no sacrificial ritual connected with these festive meals. During Eid al-Adha, Arabic, Festival of Sacrifice, marking the last day of the Hajj, the annual pilgrimage to Mecca, families that can afford to may sacrifice a ritually acceptable animal, sheep, goat, camel, or cow, but the rite is not obligatory. It is not the sacrifice that is important, but rather the visit to the sacred city. Conclusion. The organization of sacrificial rites in the different cultures and religions has undoubtedly been influenced by a number of factors. Economic considerations, for example, certainly have had some impact upon primitive peoples in the selection of the victim and the time of sacrifice, and in the determination of whether the victim is consumed or totally destroyed, and whether the sacrificer is an individual or a collective group. The importance of such factors is an aspect of sacrifice that deserves increased investigation. Nevertheless, sacrifice is not a phenomenon that can be reduced to rational terms. It is fundamentally a religious act that has been of profound significance to individuals and social groups throughout history, a symbolic act that establishes a relationship between man and the sacred order. For many peoples of the world, throughout time, sacrifice has been the very heart of their religious life. Religion as such is generally regarded as a force for peace. However, throughout history, it has also served as a force or even a weapon of war. As we have seen, religion is almost always a significant element in culture. In its many aspects it may pervade a given society. How then is religion, as it were, mobilized for war? Certain conditions must exist if religion is to be used effectively as a weapon of war. First, there must be a community of believers who are willing to take collective action based on their common belief. Religious identity is only one among many identities that humans may possess. However, for religion to become a weapon of war, the religious identity of a group must be ranked very high among that group's scale of values. A historical example of this is the situation that existed in the Iberian Peninsula during the Middle Ages, where people identified themselves, not by ethnicity but primarily by their religious affiliation as Christians, Muslims, or Jews. Indeed, one of the commonly recognized virtues of Islam is that very seldom discriminated on the basis of race or ethnicity, although the accepted Islamic worldview is based on religious discrimination between believer, non-believer, and people of the book. Another necessary condition is that the group be affected by conditions of real or perceived oppression. Note that the key is that the group in question must perceive itself as oppressed. In this connection, perception is truly reality. It is important to observe that although the conditions discussed are necessary for the effective use of religion as a weapon, their existence is not sufficient. That is, they do not guarantee that the use of religion as a weapon will occur. They merely create this possibility. The emergence of a particular instance of use of religion as a weapon comes as the result of a human decision, or more precisely a series of decisions whose combination serves as a catalyst to this outcome. Religions that accept that there are certain writings that are uniquely inspired by God and thus have an inherent and eternal authority are often preoccupied with the interpretation of these writings. The interpretation of sacred texts is one of the aspects of religion most amenable to reason. Indeed, Throughout the history of the three great monotheistic faiths, religious scholars have made their name based on specific interpretations of their tradition. Scriptural interpretation in the monotheistic religions is an enormously complicated subject that is also tied to cultural developments and the history of ideas. In general terms, scriptural interpretation takes one of two forms. One of these posits that Scripture is, as a minimum, inspired by God. In extreme cases it is considered as the very utterance of God. The other main interpretative option is the belief that, although Scripture may be divinely inspired, it neither final nor infallible, and thus is subject to interpretation, development, and contextualization. Note that both these positions are hermeneutical or interpretational frameworks. They both have internal logic, so that their acceptance is a matter of belief. As such, they are not subject to rational confirmation or denial. Once either position is accepted, deductive and inductive logic may be applied to its interpretation and commentary. The first of these positions is commonly known as a fundamentalist position, referring to the belief that it seeks to retain the fundamentals of the faith. Fundamentalist interpretations exist in all three monotheistic religions. The second position is the belief that Scripture is subject to interpretation. The texts of the Jewish Scripture, particularly the Torah and the Psalms, as well as the Quran, contain many passages where God prescribes violence against the unfaithful. Many of the Psalms explicitly invoke God's wrath upon the enemies. 15 Others make use of bellicose imagery. 16 See for example the two texts from the Bible and the Quran quoted at the beginning of this study. Obviously, advocates of a fundamentalist interpretation of Scripture place themselves at odds against all other competing positions, both within their own faith tradition and especially against outsiders. In purely religious terms, many advocates of fundamentalism deny the possibility of salvation to those who do not accept their interpretation of their faith. At worst, they may advocate violence against the other. In its extreme, this position is one of the historical sources for wars based on religion. Today, the Salafist and Wahhabi schools of Quranic interpretation have been identified as ideological sources of the modern call for external jihad and the restoration of the Islamic theocracy, the Caliphate. Fundamentalist Judaism also calls for the restoration of the Temple of Jerusalem and of the territory of Greater Israel in the manner of a theocracy. These two positions are obviously irreconcilable, and if unchecked, would make any compromise needed for peacemaking in Palestine impossible. Unfortunately, advocates of these two positions are currently active and influential in the Middle East. Christianity too has not been and is not free from various forms of fundamentalism. The Christian texts themselves, the Gospels and the books of the New Testament, are remarkably free from violent pronouncements. Indeed, Jesus himself advocated what seems to be an extreme form of pacifism and insisted that "my kingdom is not of this world." However, most Christians accept the Jewish scriptures, which they call the Old Testament, as a valid although imperfect revelation from God. Thus, Christians have also on occasion used these texts to justify violence in the name of religion. Despite this tendency, Christianity was in its origin and for over 400 years truly a pacifist religion that abhorred all violence as sinful, its followers choosing martyrdom over the most basic right of individual or collective self-defense. Only with the advent of official status as the religion of the Roman Empire were Christians forced to wrestle with the concept that collective violence in the form of war may, in some instances, be morally justified. This idea was developed by Thomas Aquinas and to this day is the leading Christian justification for war. The idea of the just war also serves as the basis for the modern Western humanitarian theory of war. Despite very sharp theoretical limitations on both the justification for war and on moral behavior in war, Christian practice did not follow theory, and vicious. Wars against enemies of a different religion, unorthodox Christians, and even between Christians of the same persuasion have bloodied the course of human history. Science fiction is full of examples of aliens taking over the minds and bodies of humans to further their own ends, but where did science fiction get the idea? Fact can be stranger than fiction. There are many examples in biology of parasites, pathogens, and viruses infecting the brain of a host and controlling the animal's behavior. To understand our model of viral religion, let us first look at some examples in biology. Grasshoppers infected with the hairworm, Spinochordodes tallinii, are more likely to jump into water where the hairworm reproduces. Thus, the parasite makes its host suicidal to further its own reproduction. The rabies virus infects very specific neurons in the brain of the mammal host to create aggressive behavior. This induces the host to attack and bite animals it might otherwise avoid or ignore. The virus takes over the brain of the host for its own purposes without regard for the well-being of the host, who usually dies. The lancet fluke, Dicrocilium, infects the brain of ants by taking control and driving them to climb to the top of a blade of grass where they can be eaten by a cow. The ingested fluke then lays eggs in the cow gut. Eventually, the eggs exit the cow, and hungry snails eat the dung, and fluke eggs. The fluke enters the snail's digestive gland and gets excreted in sticky slime full of a seething mass of flukes to be drunk by ants as a source of moisture. A particularly interesting example is the parasitic protozoa Toxoplasma gondii. This protozoa causes infected rodents to lose their inborn aversion to cat smells. This behavior is beneficial to Toxoplasma, because it reproduces in cats that have eaten infected mice and rats. Infected cats in turn spread Toxoplasma through their droppings. Robert Sapolsky, writing in the March 2003 edition of Scientific American, says, "The infected rodents can still distinguish between all other kinds of smells but selectively lose their fear of cat pheromones, making them much easier for the cat to catch." Sapolsky goes on to say, "This is akin to someone getting infected with a brain parasite that has no effect whatsoever on the person's thoughts, emotions, SAT scores, or television preferences but, to complete its life cycle, generates an irresistible urge to go to the zoo, scale a fence and try to French kiss the pissiest looking polar bear. A parasite-induced fatal attraction." Taking this well-established strategy in biology, we can apply the viral concept to religion. While the parasite takes over the perceptions of the ant, religion similarly seems to take over the perceptions of those it infects. Imagine that a religion is a virus with its own unique mix of properties. Just as the HIV virus is different than a cold virus, both infect and take over the mechanisms of the body in ways that allow them to reproduce. Religions have 5 useful properties that are present in different degrees, including the ability to infect people, create antibodies or defenses against other viruses, take over certain mental and physical functions and hide itself within the individual in such a way that it is not detectable by the individual, use specific methods for spreading the virus, program the host to replicate the virus. Every religion is more or less effective in each of these areas. Let us take a closer look at each of these properties. Infecting people. Virtually all religions rely upon early childhood indoctrination as the prime infection strategy. Other infection strategies include proselytizing, offering help and financial aid with strings attached, providing educational opportunities at religious institutions, and many other approaches which we encounter frequently in the media and in daily exposure to religion. Creating defenses against other religions. When a religion infects a person, a host in biological terms, it immediately begins creating antibodies against competing viruses. For example, newly minted Baptists will get Bible study that is full of verses and justifications for the rightness of their religion and a host of arguments against other interpretations. In the early stages, it is a race to get as many antibodies as possible into the new convert so the host will have defenses against the rest of the world, and especially competing religions. Once a person is infected with Catholicism, he is rarely tempted to become a Muslim. Once a person is infected as a Baptist, she rarely becomes a Buddhist. Generally speaking, when children are infected with a specific God virus, they stay reasonably close to that religion for the rest of their lives. A Baptist may become a Lutheran or Presbyterian, but rarely Catholic, Muslim, or pagan. That is not the general understanding of a parasite. Religious immunity is a powerful program designed to ensure that the children are protected from outside influence. In a pluralistic society, this is important. The virus cannot control contact with other religions in the environment, so it takes prophylactic measures to keep people blind or unreceptive to other religions. This is especially important for children whose immunity is not yet complete. Childhood religious infection is so strong that it seems to have the power to create a permanent imprint in most people. Imprinting was first identified by Konrad Lorenz and Nico Tinbergen, who won the 1973 Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine. In their work with birds and other animals, they showed that many animals learn to identify their parents remarkably fast after birth. In a famous experiment with geese, they demonstrated that substituting a parent figure like a human led to imprinting on the substitute. After imprinting was complete with the substitute, they reintroduced the real parent goose. To their surprise, the goslings could not be reprogrammed to follow the true parent. Instead, they followed the substitute figure. This powerful and rapid learning is strong in many animals and appears to be non-reversible most of the time. Perhaps religious infection is similar. Once a person has imprinted to a given religion, he does not easily change religions. The rituals, songs, ceremony, etc., have a way of sticking with some people so that they do not feel complete unless they are in that particular ritual environment. Taking over certain mental and physical functions and hiding within the individual. Even an adult host who is not overtly religious can act as if the virus is alive and well in his brain. Inquire about religious beliefs, and the host will recite many of the doctrines he learned at age 5 or 10. Just as the chickenpox virus continues to live quietly in the body after the disease is gone, the God virus may live quietly in the host until something evokes it. Stress can activate the chickenpox virus in adults, leading to the condition known as shingles. Similarly, stress tends to activate the God virus in many people. If they have a traumatic experience, they may reactivate their childhood religion. They start attending church, receiving more antibodies to help them stay on the straight and narrow. The virus takes over their mental functions, as illustrated by the display of new guilt-based behavior. The God virus also has the ability to take over physical functions. For example, many religions attempt to take over sexuality, as with celibacy or abstinence vows. To a lesser degree, the virus may change eating and dietary functions, requiring fasts or dietary restrictions. Finally, the God virus has the ability to hide from internal detection. Once infected, the individual cannot detect major contradictions in his beliefs and behavior. Belief systems become self-evident to him, and no amount of logical discourse will move him from his belief. If a Mormon and Catholic were to debate the merits of their respective religions, neither could see his own inconsistencies and logical fallacies, but would see the others quite clearly. Using specific and efficient vehicles to spread the virus, the vector in biology, the organism that spreads disease, is called a vector. A mosquito is a vector for malaria, and a tick is a vector for Lyme disease. In malaria, the mosquito bites a person with malaria and ingests the Plasmodium parasite. The Plasmodium then moves through the mosquito by creating a perforation in the mosquito's gut and passing to the salivary glands. When the mosquito bites the next person, only females bite, injects the Plasmodium into the new person. Vectors are critical in the life cycle of many parasites. The vector may or may not be harmed in the process of transferring the parasite. Bats seem less affected by rabies than raccoons, but both can be vectors. The flea that carries the Yersinia pestis bacteria for the infamous bubonic plague will die in its effort to infect the next rat or human. The bacteria literally block the flea's digestive tract to force it to regurgitate the Y. pestis bacteria into its victim. It renders the flea incapable of digesting what it eats. In a similar fashion, God viruses also need vectors. People can be programmed, even re-engineered, to be effective carriers of the virus. We call these people priests, ministers, imams, rabbis, popes, televangelists, shamans, apostles, nuns, Bible professors and, to a lesser degree, elders, deacons, or Sunday school teachers. The virus may re-engineer these vectors significantly. Re-engineering may include years of study in a seminary and learning massive amounts of sometimes obscure and far-fetched ideas as well as many tricks for passing the virus along. It may also include training in how to be celibate and not pass one's genes along to be less encumbered with reproductive overhead, spouse and children, and, therefore, more efficient as a vector for the virus. Delusion is employed in the sense of priests and nuns believing that they are married to an invisible god or to the church. Programming the host to replicate the virus. Finally, the god virus must activate a program for replication in any host. Certain behaviors are programmed to ensure that the virus is passed on to others, especially the host's children. These may include guilt-inducing ideas that create a sense of security in rituals. Examples include First Communion, baptism, bar mitzvah, confirmation, daily prayer, or Bible reading and confession. Religious immunities. In 1796, Edward Jenner demonstrated that infecting a person with the cowpox virus effectively immunized the person from the dreaded smallpox virus. In other words, one virus immunizes against another. Religions function in a similar manner. An infected Baptist is generally immunized against Catholicism or Islam. The religion creates a series of defenses within a host to prevent him from seriously considering any other religion. For example, a Baptist would rarely think of studying the Quran as diligently as the Bible. Many Catholics would not spend time studying the writings of John Wesley. A Shiite Muslim would not think to study St. Paul. A Sunni Muslim may find Buddhism unfathomable. The God virus builds a wall so formidable that many people can't conceive of another religion, let alone understand it. Evidence is seen in the Taliban destruction of the Buddhas of Bamyan, one of the cultural treasures of the world. In 2001, with the help of Saudi and Pakistani engineers, these giant 6th century statues were blown up. From an outside observer's view, the behavior of members of the various religions looks and sounds remarkably similar. Listen to the preaching of Osama bin Laden and Pat Robertson, for example. Both say natural disasters are a God's judgment for some evil. Both denigrate the role of women in their respective religions. Both see Satan at work in the world. From a high-level view, all the major religions look and sound alike in many ways. With a few word changes, a Pat Robertson sermon could easily be turned into something bin Laden might preach. I use examples of well-known religious leaders, but the analyses could be taken from local churches or mosques just as easily. From years of listening to fundamentalist ministers, I can attest to the incredible statements they make from the pulpit with not a whisper of objection from an otherwise intelligent and reasonable congregation. Both bin Laden and Robertson have fully functioning brains with all the capabilities for logic, reason, study, learning and critical thinking, but the God virus has disabled some of these functions as effectively as Toxoplasma gondii disables the rat's fear of cat pheromones. Nothing else needs to be changed. Simply disabling specific critical thinking skills is all that is necessary for the God virus. Inhibitions and prohibitions. An important part of viral control may be found in inhibitions and prohibitions, which keep the believer focused on rituals and actions that reinforce the religion on a daily, even hourly basis. These are often seen in sexual prohibitions: no sex before marriage, no sex during menstruation, no homosexuality, etc. Many religions also have food prohibitions and rules: fish on Friday, no pork, fasting during certain holidays. Each religion takes a different approach, but all share the same objective: keep the infected focused on their own religion and protect the unit of propagation, the family. Muslims accomplish this by severely prohibiting female freedoms and expanding male power to control the female and the family. Catholics accomplish it by requiring parents to raise their children as Catholic and mandating sex as strictly a procreative activity with all extramarital sex prohibited. The prohibition is seen most dramatically in the celibacy of Catholic priests and nuns. Here the virus self-propagates by forcing the host to forego procreation in service of passing the virus along to as many other people as possible. Just as the rabies virus takes over the brain of the raccoon and reprograms it to bite other animals, even at the cost of its own life, the Catholic virus directs the priest to spend all his discretionary energies propagating the virus. This is genetic suicide for the priest's genes, but gives the Catholic Church a powerful tool for propagation. Religious vectors use sophisticated methods of preparing and opening potential hosts of the religion. Religious vectors learn preaching techniques that emotionally open up the potential host. Vectors are expensive for the virus to produce, so they are protected and supported, often to an extreme degree, as seen in the protection of priests and preachers in the many recent sex abuse scandals. Vectors can actually be more efficient as vectors when dead. Examples of efficient dead vectors include Jesus, Paul, Ali, son-in-law of Mohammed, V.I. Lenin, founder of the Soviet Union, Che Guevara, Latin American revolutionary, and Joseph Smith.